Hey gang, this week's episode is brought to you by oldschoolshirts.com. Hey, check them out. You like defunct teams and leagues and t-shirt form? Well, you'll find them there, but a whole bunch of other stuff too. Do you remember a radio station of the past or perhaps a mall that you used to go to? All kinds of great cultural and sports memories can be found at the great folks at oldschoolshirts.com. Promo code GOODSEATS for 10% off all of your purchases. And now, here's our show.
I have to give him all the credit in the world, but again, he's a 45-year-old man in a young man's game. But look at that competitive spirit coming out now.
Straight right hand landing for Foreman. He's had a pretty good round here in number 10.
Again, Atlas didn't counter. Atlas, here we go again with the Atlas. Michael Moore is
Down goes Moore on a right hand. An unbelievably close-in right hand shot.
5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
It happened. It happened.
I can't believe it. I can't believe it. Here's a guy I said was a clubber.
As referee Joe Cortez waved his arms over Moore, George Foreman knelt in prayer in the neutral corner.
You know, this was a 2-1 fight, but in my mind it was a gazillion to 1 that George Foreman could ever win the heavyweight championship again. This is a really remarkable achievement, and it has to stand on its own. We're in a show and tell medium, and show does it all.
So some of the old power was still there after all.
It sure fooled me. Didn't show it in the entire fight where it came from.
Well, we mentioned that he was having a strong round. He had set up some blows, and then that right hand anesthetized Michael Moore.
It sure did. And that's the one thing I said George couldn't do. He couldn't get you out with one punch. But boy, he sure fooled me and Michael Moore.
It landed right on the point of the chin, Gil.
Right on the button where it says good night.
Welcome to Good Seats Still Available, a curious little podcast devoted to exploring what used to be in professional sports. Here's your host, Tim Hanlon.
Oh, it happened all right. How are you, everybody? It's your pal, Tim Hanlon. It is Good Seats Still Available. As you know by now, this is the curious little podcast that is devoted to what used to be in professional sports. Thank you for finding us, downloading us, putting us in your earbuds. However you're ingesting the proceedings this week, we are glad to have you. And we are just tickled pink to have as our guest this week the great Jim Lampley, a voice that I know most of you know from years and years and years of amazing, top-notch, high-level sportscasting, hosting, narration, etc. And we're going to get into lots of interesting stuff. Of course, his start at ABC Sports, the myriad of Olympics across ABC, a little bit of CBS, and a lot of NBC as well. And of course, well-renowned for his many years. I want to say it's at least 20, maybe more than that, 30 years with HBO and World Championship Boxing, Boxing After Dark, World Championship Boxing. The names change and stuff, but Jim Lampley's a name synonymous, along with Larry Merchant, with coverage of some of the greatest fights of all time, some of the most memorable calls, and just amazing action like you heard there at the outset. That was from, let's see, November 5th of 1994. That was the One for the Ages bout between Michael Moore and George Foreman, looking to reclaim for the umpteenth time a heavyweight championship title belt. And indeed he did there at the MGM Grand that evening. Gil Clancy filling in for George Foreman, who would usually be the second or third voice there at ringside. But he was fighting, so Gil Clancy was in the mix, along with Larry Merchant and the aforementioned Jim Lampley. And an amazing fight, and just one of the amazing fights that Jim covered over the many years. We'll have a couple more clips of some of those along the way. But of course, while he may be remembered for all those great things, we can't let him forget about some of the forgotten things. That's our little hook around here, right? And we're going to certainly drag Jim back to some of those memories, for better or for worse. You may remember that Jim Lampley was a major voice in ABC's coverage of the original USFL. He was the studio host. He also called a bunch of games at that time for said fledgling league. We'll hear his thoughts about that league. Jim was also a newscaster. If you might remember, in the Los Angeles area in the late 80s, early 90s, Jim Lampley was the young, fresh-faced male anchor compatriot of Bree Walker there at KCBS Channel 2 Action News, doing the local news thing back when local news was maybe in some cases sometimes almost more remunerative than a national gig was. And we'll drag Jim to some memories back in that too. And really going back to 1987, July 1st of 1987, who was the first host when sports radio WFAN in New York, the legendary signal that essentially established sports radio as a thing in New York. Jim Lampley was that first host voice. He wasn't the actual first voice. That was Susan Waldman. And then there was a little bit of a newscast and I think there was a weather report or something in there. But when push came to shove, the first actual host was Jim Lampley on the old WFAN. Now, it was at 10:50, filling in for the former WHN country signal there in New York. It's moved around a couple of different frequencies, but it's still going strong. But Jim was there as well. And just a lot of amazing stories and memories to come in this awesome conversation with the great Jim Lampley, who, depending on when you're listening to this, if you're listening to this on April 14th when we drop the episode, this brand new book of his memoir, It Happened, A Uniquely Lucky Life in Sports Television, will be out tomorrow, April 15th. But if you're listening to it on the 15th or thereafter, it's available now. So either way, get thee to a bookstore, an independent bookstore in your local neighborhood if you'd like, or go to our website at goodseatsstillavailable.com. Just search up this episode numbered 390 with me and the great Jim Lampley, and you'll find a couple of convenient links where you can get the hardcover, the Kindle version, or even the audiobook through our affiliate link there with our friends at Amazon. We'll get a couple of shekels of referral love when you do that, and you'll get the book in whatever form you desire it, in just about as quickly as you can humanly get it. I will assure you that we are just scratching the surface of the stories, the memories, and the opinions that Jim Lampley has in this here conversation. But the book is just chock full of many, many more. Highly encourage. It's a great read, fun to read. And I suspect there's probably another one in him at some point, as you'll hear, because there's just so much great stuff that let's not waste any more time. All right, let's get right to it. Here's our conversation we had with Jim a couple of weeks back. This was, I think, during the NCAA first round and stuff, and we were trying to work around his fandom of the UNC Tar Heels who made the tournament. But this is a great conversation. I hope you enjoyed as much as I did. Please, as always, enjoy. I would love for you and for the youngins out there who were not blessed to have your skills in the 70s and the 80s and beyond. How did you start in this wacky business of television sports broadcasting? Because your ascent was very quick, and I'm not sure most people sort of understand how pioneering you were in that quick ascent.
Well, one of the things I say to people about my book is that it is, to a huge degree, a book about luck and coincidence and the overwhelming importance of being on the right side of luck and coincidence, which I was in ways that are almost difficult to fathom looking back. I very I very assertively tried to destroy my undergraduate college career with beer and poker and other social activities.
And this is where you was this UNC undergrad?
This is my first 2.5 years at the University of North Carolina.
Yep.
Before I had to go home to my mother's crappy apartment in Miami to make clear that I had, at that point in my Carolina career, taken 24 courses. I had passed 17 of them. I had a 1.44 academic average. I was at some point going to have to take 2 correspondence courses and make A's or B's on both of them to get back into school. I had not made an A on any course up to that moment in time. And I went home to Miami with my tail between my legs. And my mother resignedly and disappointedly said, looks like you're really not going to make it as a college student, so you better figure something else out. And I began looking for work, and the 2 jobs that became available were, one, management trainee at the global headquarters of Burger King on Biscayne Boulevard.
Sure,
and
sure.
two, file clerk at First National Bank of Miami in the mortgage department. And the second of the 2 sounded more glamorous to me. So I went to work as a file clerk at First National Bank of Miami mortgage department, 2,500 square feet of file cabinets in one room, 4 women between the ages of 62 and 65 and me. And I sat in that room for 13 months and managed through that experience to get my head straight, realized that I needed to take the 2 correspondence courses that would get me back into school at Carolina. I had to make A's on both. I had never made an A on anything up to that point in college. And I buckled down and I took the 2 correspondence courses and I made A's, and I went back to Chapel Hill and I made a long string of A's from there to graduate school. And I went to graduate school after working in politics for a year. I went to graduate school in radio, television, mass communications. Somebody intercepted me in the hall one day and said, "Boy, you have a great voice. Do you know anything about sports?" And I said, "Of course, I know everything about sports. Great. I need somebody to help me by doing the post-game and pre-game interviews with opposing coaches on the UNC football and basketball radio networks." Done. I'm in. And I now had a job that actually entailed holding a microphone and taping interviews. And that led to eventually a weekly Dean Smith show on WCHL. And that led eventually to graduate school in the Department of Radio, Television, and Motion Pictures, which was an interesting process because in order to get into that master's degree program, I had to meet with the overwhelmingly authoritarian, powerful chairman of the department. And when I went to meet with him, he had my transcript on his desk, and I knew that right there in the middle of the transcript was the F I had made on his introductory RTVMP course, RTVMP 58, the semester before I went off to Florida. So I assumed, okay, well, this is over with. I'm not getting into this graduate program. And he sat there and scanned the transcript, and I could see his eyebrows go up when he saw the F in RTVMP 58. And eventually he looked back up and said, "Well, I can see that the Army did you a world of good." I had never been anywhere near the Army. And so I didn't know exactly what to do at that point. And I gave him a sort of a sideways shrug, hoping that that would offload it. And it did. And I entered that graduate school program, and I was the best graduate student they ever had. I was making nothing but H's and knocking out every single assignment, et cetera. And at about that time, 1973 going into 1974, ABC Sports made clear to communication schools around the country that they were going to conduct a national search to try to find, in effect, the face and voice of the American college student, to occupy a new role, which was going to be called college age reporter, and which was basically built around putting a young college age announcer, close to college age announcer, on the sidelines of college football. They had learned from covering the Munich massacre that radio frequency signals would do things that they didn't think they would do. They discovered that these RF signals would leap over concrete walls and go around metal barriers. When they went back to New York from Munich, they had a meeting among the engineering and sports and news departments to try to figure out what they could do with this knowledge. And the first idea they adopted was we could put a reporter on the sidelines of a football game. And through an extremely long, circuitous narrative, which involves astonishing luck and circumstance, I was one of two people who was eventually chosen for that job. And when after 1 year, the network decided that they didn't really need two of us, I was the one who survived, and therefore wound up having a network television career and a network television talent contract when I was 25 years old, with no massive experience to underpin it, just this gimmick of putting a college age or close to college age announcer on the sideline of college football. So,
well, I wouldn't call it just a gimmick, right? I mean, the fact that you had some talent, but let me back up for a quick second, because that's insane. I mean, even by today's standards, that quick ascendance, and frankly, and looking back, right, in essence, you pioneered essentially, whether you wanted to or not, being on the sidelines, which is now just a staple and a given for most major sports today, and perhaps
at the end of the first season, I told the senior college football producer who was administering the whole thing, I said, you know that eventually this is going to become your vehicle for putting beautiful women on the telecast. And he said, well, we're not quite there yet. I said, well, you'll get there. And so, I give myself credit for foreseeing what the vehicle would become and what positive benefit it could provide, creating an avenue for young women to get into sports broadcasting and be seen on that telecast.
What did you think you were getting into when you were selected, right? Did you really have any knowledge or understanding of this whole RF frequency thing and all that kind of stuff? Or were you just happy to be picked by the one of the only three networks out there to quote unquote do sports and television?
Well, in order to fathom that, have you read my book?
Oh my God, I couldn't put it down. It was great, and you'll see how well I read it in a few minutes.
All right, I'm going to tell you things that I know you know, but they're important to your interview here. I drove 8 hours from Chapel Hill to Birmingham. I had to do it overnight. I got there on a 91-degree May day in Birmingham. There were 36 of us, bright-eyed, fresh-faced college student types in the room. I was the oldest one because I was the only graduate student. I was 25. Most of the rest of them were 22. I began to get a negative feeling about that. And then eventually we had to draw numbers out of a fishbowl to see in what order we were going to be interviewed. And I was number 34 out of 36. So then I realized, okay, I've got a 3 or 4 hour wait here before I'm going to be able to get into a car and drive back to Chapel Hill. It's 91 degrees with 96% humidity outside. All these other kids are going to get to be interviewed before me. This is a complete waste of my time. And I stewed about it. So when I got into the room with Rune Arledge's assistant, Dick Ebersol, and the two young production types he had brought with him on the road, the first question from one of the young production types was, what do you think of our idea here? And I said, let me get this straight. You're going to 16 different campuses. You're going to interview more than 400 college age or close to college age kids for 6 to 8 minutes each. That's what I was promised, 6 to 8 minutes each. And on that basis, you're going to choose the face and voice of the American college student. So he looked at me with a blank look. And I said, what I'm trying to say here is it's the biggest load of crap I've ever heard of in my life. And I'm ashamed of myself for having been stupid enough to get into my car and drive down here from Chapel Hill. So the rest of the interview was not all that tremendously dissimilar from that. And later, I saw the form on which Dick Ebersol, the supervisor of the interview process, had written arrogant, abrasive, antagonistic, alienated. And once I was chosen as the person to do the job, that became known in the football production truck as the 4As. Every time I popped off about something, every time I wasn't completely cooperative with whatever was going on, every time I ever asked a question, the director, Andy Sedaris, would say, there it is, the 4As. And so, so I sort of became from the beginning a little bit of a caricature of myself. But the senior producer for college football and senior vice president of production at the network, Chuck Howard, was
legendary Chuck Howard, yes.
What we Carolina types call a dookie, all right? And eventually I learned that he wasn't the only dookie. There were two others in the ABC sports hierarchy. But from the first moment I met him, Chuck and I started talking basketball. And he was so happy to have somebody around with whom he could talk about ACC basketball. And oh, by the way, this guy actually did the Dean Smith radio show. So I became Chuck's favorite, and that meant a lot, not just with regard to the college football telecast, but also meant that as soon as college football was over with, he was looking for ways to put me onto the production schedule to do all of the wacky, out-of-the-way folk events on ABC's Wide World of Sports, the wrist wrestling, the barrel jumping, the log rolling, the motorcycles on ice, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Those were, in effect, a training program for me to become a network television sports commentator. And they also helped to bond me to the fraternity of senior announcers, all the people who were above me on the totem pole at ABC Sports, who under normal circumstances would have only wanted to see me erased by a tractor trailer, but they actually grew to like me because all of them had been to all of those events once, and now they didn't have to go back. I was the sudden addition to the staff who was going to have to do all those wacky wide world events every year for the first 4 or 5 years. So people who otherwise would have despised me loved me because they didn't have to go to Hayward, Wisconsin, or Petaluma, California, or Central Islip, New York. I was the one who was doing all of that. So it was a bizarre convergence of political circumstances. And oh, by the way, we haven't even thrown in the fact that I had grown up in Hendersonville, North Carolina before moving to South Florida. And in Hendersonville, North Carolina, Roone Arledge's parents, Roone Sr. and his wife, were my neighbors. And I had caddied for both of them at the golf course. In fact, the first time I met Roone in New York, I said, "How's your dad?" And he looked at me with this, totally confounded look and said, "Why would you ask a question like that?" And I said, "Well, I guess nobody noticed, but I'm from Hendersonville and I've caddied for your dad." And he said, "You will never tell that to anybody again in your life." Roone's gone. So now I can tell the tale.
Right. Well, tell me this, though. I mean, so ABC in the 1970s, ABC Sports in the 1970s. I mean, you could not have chosen, even if it was in your domain to do so, a better and more fertile place if you're interested in sports and some of the biggest properties in all of sports. And I guess the question I have in there is in the beginning of all of your just amazing stops along the way in that early part of your career after the college football thing, how much of it found you and how much did you fight for it? Like, say, the Olympics, right? That doesn't just land on your lap, or kind of does it, right? I mean, you're obviously
believe me, Tim, I would give myself credit if I deserved it. Okay. And I definitely ultimately deserved credit for adjusting to every circumstance, for living up to everything that was expected of me, and for honoring the opportunities that I was given. I think I ultimately do get that credit. But everything that fertilized and propagated and pushed forward my career, that all began in Chuck Howard's office, senior vice president in charge of production. It migrated to Dennis Lewin's office, coordinating producer of ABC's Wide World of Sports. Ultimately, both of them would say, you can't give us the credit. Roone is a dictatorial leader here. If Roone didn't want you to be doing these things, you wouldn't be doing them. The way ABC Sports worked, and oh, by the way, in touching on your point, ABC struggled in news and entertainment compared to CBS and NBC, which were both bigger and more established.
Very true.
The area where ABC was totally preeminent was sports, and Olympics, the pro football merger, all of those things. ABC positioned itself brilliantly for that because the executives in charge of entertainment and news weren't as good as Roone Arledge. Roone Arledge was uniquely talented and brilliant. And so that's why ABC Sports became the dominant sports division in network television. And for me to have skipped over the whole, by and large, local television element, to have gone past station news and all of that kind of purgatory, to go straight to a network job, to be 25, 26 years old and doing Wide World of Sports and going to the Olympics as a feature reporter in that day and age, it was beyond all belief. It was something that could not possibly have happened and hadn't happened before, and I was the beneficiary of it.
Now, in your book, you do have some spot on acknowledgments, shall we say, of maybe not at the time, but looking back at perhaps some of the headiness, perhaps that might have crept in along the way, especially in those early years. I would argue it would probably be hard not to think that, given your ascendance and all these roles in the Olympics and all that kind of stuff. I mean, you were a big deal with capital letters, right? For it was clear to any sports fan in the United States who's seeing you on all these different properties all over the place. How did you not? Well, how did you, or how did you not get a big head in that process?
I did get a big head. I did get a big head. I tried to control it, and I was not always in control of it. I was very fortunate that Chuck Howard took a very sincere, ongoing public interest or personal interest in me. And on the few occasions when I got a little bit outside my lane or way too full of myself in some way, shape, or form, he would call me into his office and say, okay, this is what you did. Don't do that. Just don't. Just stop it. Be aware of how lucky you are. Be aware of all the things that are ultimately going to come your way and fall to you. Look at the age of the people who are in front of you and recognize that you would be a fool to leave any excrement in the road, okay? Keep a clean path. And so he told me that frequently enough that I managed to develop probably better filters for my own behavior than had been the case at the beginning, and I survived despite some discontent on the part of the power structure, particularly Jim McKay and Howard Cosell, who could not stand the idea of me being a Roone Arledge favored person.
Well, I mean, the fact that you were so young and so bright and so, so well versed in everything and getting all these great opportunities,
and so lucky,
a bit of jealousy,
and so lucky.
Well,
so,
okay,
so visibly lucky in bypassing a lot of the necessary steps.
Well, fair enough. Maybe in hindsight, but the talent certainly. Let's put it this way: you don't get that far without having a significant amount of talent and your abilities, frankly. I mean, your dexterity. But you have an interesting little anecdote in the book, and obviously we're not going to give away too much in the book because it's a really, really good read, and I mean that. I see books all the time, and this was just this is great. I love the it's a relatively easy read, but it's just got all kinds of fun chunks of info in here. But I would say the question I sort of had there, you had a little I guess introduction and or warning about maybe tell the audience what Keith Jackson kind of reminded you as you were in the main office, shall we say, once again.
Well, that first college football season, 1974, and there were two of us on the sidelines that first year. Eventually, it narrowed down to just me. But there was a person who had been chosen ahead of me, and I was sort of the second choice. And that person was at big games, national games like Ohio State, Michigan, or Auburn, Alabama. He was on one sideline, and I was on the other. Or on regional weekends, we'd get split up, and I would get the A game and he would get the B game, and stuff like that. But at the beginning of the season, it was clear that Keith was skeptical about both of us, skeptical about the role, and a little bit discomfited that all this was taking place in his first year as the A game play-by-play guy.
Why too hokey in his mind, given the college football roots of his?
Well, it's a gimmick, and I mean, it's a technological gimmick. It wouldn't exist if they didn't learn what they learned about radio frequency microphones and cameras. And now it's, we're going to put a reporter on the sideline. Well, what the heck is the reporter on the sideline going to say that I don't say from the play-by-play booth, et cetera? I couldn't blame him for feeling that way, really. He felt like his turf was being poached on. But he was a Southerner, Bremen, Georgia. I was a Southerner, Hendersonville, North Carolina. He was a golfer. I was, at that time, a golfer. He liked good shoes. So did I. We had some things in common. So we could have civil conversations and, get to know each other a little bit more every week. And about the fifth or sixth week, we were in Fayetteville, Arkansas to do a University of Arkansas game. We were staying at a Holiday Inn. And as I was leaving the production meeting, Keith summoned me over to his position at the table and said, "What are you doing tonight?" So whatever it was I was doing that night went by the wayside at that moment. I said, "What am I doing tonight?" No plans, Keith. Really just totally loose. He said, "Well, why don't you come by my room about 8:30 to 9 o'clock? We'll crack open a bottle of Stoli, and I'll tell you everything you need to know to be a network television sports announcer." So I went back to my room and tried to contain myself, collect my nerves, get ready for this big discussion with Keith Jackson in his hotel room. And went over there and sure enough, poured a couple of vodka on the rocks. And after a couple of the vodka on the rocks, he came across the room and he stood up in front of me and kind of hitched up his pants. He said, "Jimmy, been around this business a long time, done a lot of different things, as you can see. Listen now, I'll tell you everything you need to know to be a success in this business and prevent it from driving you crazy. First of all, stay off the 28th floor. Stay away from all of those supercilious executives in their Gucci shoes and their Paul Stewart suits. Get yourself a home on the sunset side of the mountains, and when Arledge and Chuck Howard and Denny Lewin and all of those people get on the plane Sunday to fly back to New York, you fly west and get yourself as far away from them as you can possibly get. And don't ever go to that office building if you can avoid it. And get yourself the best set of golf clubs you can get and spend as much time on the West Coast on your golf course as you possibly can, and ignore everything to do with network television politics." And I listened and I was grateful. "Thank you, Keith," et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So what did I do? I moved from Chapel Hill to New York. I got an apartment within walking distance of the ABC office building. Eventually, I got myself an office on the 16th floor. I went in there every day and mingled with the executives and the producers, et cetera, et cetera. Chased a couple of secretaries here and there. I did absolutely everything that Keith told me not to do.
Why?
And at the end of the day, he was probably right. But I survived it and got through it and went forward with my career.
Why did you ignore the advice? Was it this is
What
an old? I mean,
just
it's curious.
it just wasn't me. I had gone. I wasn't a guy who had, like Keith, who had done local television and then made his way up through it, and et cetera, et cetera. I wasn't that person. I had gone to graduate school in radio, television, motion pictures. I had made tremendous grades in a broadcast management program. I was thinking all the time about what Arledge and Chuck and Denny and all of them were doing. I wanted to be a part of the discussion at the Olympics and in the office and elsewhere. And everything that Keith said to me wasn't me. I even bought Paul Stewart suits and Gucci shoes because everything he wanted me to avoid, that was what I wanted.
Tell me about those 10 years then. I know it's hard to but 5 Olympics, major events. You're doing baseball, you're doing college football. You're just
trying to become a celebrity in Manhattan.
The Super Bowl.
I'm going to Studio 54 and all of the major nightclubs. I'm sitting at Warhol's table. I'm chasing.
You're taking it all in.
Huh?
You're taking it all in and then some.
100%. And I'm chasing an image that is to a certain degree not where I belong, but who could have resisted? I defy anybody in the world to have my experience, to feel the things that I felt, to be anointed the way I was, to be given those privileges, and who wouldn't have felt that it was his right, his domain, and a logical course for him to do those kinds of things. Real estate development, what is that? Oh, I want to meet this guy Trump. All sorts of stuff like that going on. And I look back at it now and think, what a fool I was. But I did learn a lot from the process.
How much? So, what did you enjoy most of that? Were the big mega events like the Olympics, which compared to today it was one of 3 choices to watch, so the ratings were just gargantuan. Or was it the offbeat stuff with the Wide World of Sports? Was it the flyer stuff like with the USFL for 3 years when you're doing the studio broadcast? I mean, or was it something just completely different, or just was it the regular rhythm that you just had so much going on that you didn't really care where you were working? You were just living the life of ABC Sports.
I think that the last answer, living the life of ABC Sports, that ought to be good enough for anybody. But the Olympics were uniquely intoxicating. And it wasn't that deep into my Olympics experience, not 1976, although I went to both Olympics in 1976 as a feature reporter, not 1980, although at Lake Placid in 1980, I worked for both sports and news. That was Roone anointing me in a very distinctive way that helped upgrade my image. And then in 1984, I was the late night host for both Sarajevo and Los Angeles. And it was the experience of being the late night host in the studio in Sarajevo and Los Angeles, which most got to me, because at that moment, I'm saying to myself, all right, how many more years before McKay is out of that chair and I'm the next one in? It just looked so clear to me. Al Michaels is going to inherit all of the major play-by-play assignments. Al Michaels is a naturally and unusually gifted play-by-play guy. I do the wide worlds well, and I've done my college football games well when I did them, et cetera, but I'm really more comfortable in the studio. I'm really more comfortable being on camera. I think that's where my real talent and destiny lies. So to me, it looked pretty clear. Al's going to be the play-by-play star. He's going to be Keith Jackson, Frank Gifford, Bill Fleming, Chris Schenkel, all those people wrapped into one. And he's going to dominate our play-by-play presentations. I'll probably still do some wide worlds here and there, and track and field, swimming, things of that nature. But at the end of the day, I'm a studio guy, and I'm going to inherit McKay's role as the studio host of the Olympics. And frankly, that's really where I fit. So that was where I was pretty sure I was headed up until the network got bought by a station ownership company named Capital Cities in 1986, 87. And that's when my world dramatically changed.
Okay, I want to get to that in a second. And that's amazing in and of itself. Just curious, we skipped over the USFL for a second. Studio host for that. Obviously, that's of particular interest to this little silly show.
ABC Sports presents the season premiere of the United States Football League. Today, live from RFK Stadium in Washington, D.C., it's the Chicago Blitz versus the Washington Federals. The scene live in RFK Stadium. George Allen on the sidelines for the first time here since 1977. Across the way, Ray Yock, coaching here after 12 years in the Canadian Football League as head coach of the Washington Federals. A drizzly, cold day, not unlike the kind of weather you would expect here in RFK Stadium in late October or early November. It feels like football weather. Hello, I'm Jim Lampley, and I'll be honest with you. I will wait to see how many of you are that anxious to see football in spring, but everything I've seen and heard in the past 3 weeks leads me to believe that this experiment, the United States Football League, has a great chance of flying. Clearly, in my view, there are enough pro football players to go around for this league to field a credible product. And clearly, there are enough big-name football coaches, some of them with long-standing identities in American football, who are willing to commit themselves to this project. The rest is up to you. But if you're going to stick with us today, you're going to see a lot of new faces and a fascinating storyline.
What did you think of the USFL? Did you think it was like legit? Did you buy in? Did you have to go? Was it a performative act on your part, or did you legitimately think that this was something special and had a real chance at sticking around and then some?
I never thought that for a second. I never thought that there was enough room in the marketplace for that thing to sustain. If I was the studio host and I didn't care what happened, then how was a massive slice of the general public going to care about what happened? If I thought whatever Herschel Walker did in the USFL didn't matter because it wasn't the NFL, then how was the rest of the audience going to feel about it? So no, there was nothing about the USFL that felt special to me. The only good thing about the USFL was it was another studio role at ABC Sports. And I was already the studio host of college football. And now I was the studio host of this spring football league. So I was blocking out any of my other colleagues from being in studio roles at the moment when my big goal in life was to become the Olympics host.
The idea of filling in ultimately for somebody as legendary as Jim McKay, how much of that idea was yours and how much of that idea was, shall we say, fed to you in your years to build up that expectation?
Well, it never happened. I never did become the primary host of the Olympics. There were times toward the end with NBC when Dick Ebersol would put me into the chair in prime time. Bob, get a break, and Dick all but acknowledged to me, I'm doing this to you to make it up to you that the business never gave you what you certainly deserved, Thank you, Dick. He's gone now. But at the end of the day, it never happened. And it was all just musing and hoping and wanting on my part. Why couldn't I be satisfied and happy with all the astonishing luck and great good fortune that my career gave to me? I should have been. And ultimately I decided, quit wasting time thinking about what didn't happen and look at all the amazing things that did.
All right, what's this? Oldschoolshirts.com. Fantastic. You've heard me talk on and on and on about the great folks and the great wares at oldschoolshirts.com. Like the name implies, it's old school and it's shirts, and they put them together, into what they call oldschoolshirts.com. It's like the name implies, but of course we love them primarily for their sports wear. You name the league of the past, you name the team of the past, the chances are huge that they're going to have more than one shirt and different color schemes for things that you may remember from the United Football League or the Major Indoor Soccer League or various flavors of the original XFLs, plural, or the Federal League perhaps, or maybe World Team Tennis, or maybe it was the North American Soccer League, and on and on and on. But hey, it's not just sports. It's also great cultural touchstones and memories from the past. How about the officially licensed Evel Knievel connection? How about collection? Yeah, that's what he's trying to say. Various colleges. How about dead malls of the past? Ice cream parlors, maybe even radio stations that you might remember. Hey, even there's a latest edition of the now old, Aloha Stadium commemorative shirt. All that kind of stuff and more. You will find at least a handful of shirts that you will just transport you back into your past, and you will amaze and impress your friends at the same time. It's oldschoolshirts.com, and we got a promo code for you, of course. Let's save you some dough while you go there, and its promo code is Good Seats. Good Seats. That's the promo code at oldschoolshirts.com. Promo code Good Seats for 10% off all of your purchases. Hey, P.F. Wilson and your friends at oldschoolshirts.com, thank you for your sponsorship of the show. And now, back to our conversation. So what happens in the aftermath of Cap Cities and the retooling of all things of ABC and stuff? I mean, you weren't the only one disrupted, shall we say, from those events. But you were kind of really out of the sports thing for a short period of time. And I'm curious as to, and I know you talk about this in the book and stuff, and there are a couple of stops I do want to ask you about, but what was your thought about, like, okay, that's been a hell of a decade. Now what?
Well, I didn't think anything was going to be wrong when Capital Cities first bought the network. I didn't see any kind of a whammy coming. And then, to my shock and amazement, they confronted Arledge and said, "You're in charge of two network divisions, which are both overwhelming preoccupation jobs, and there's no reason in the world why any person should be president of both news and sports. Pick one." And logically enough, based on its greater societal significance, Arledge chose news, and Cap Cities was a station ownership organization. They wanted to put their stations manager, a guy named Larry Pollock, in charge of the stations division. So they needed to move a guy named Dennis Swanson from his role as the station's GM for ABC and put him in another job. So they gave Swanson the presidency of sports. And Swanson arrived as president of the sports division with one basic predilection, which was, who is Jim Lampley and why are we paying him all this money? And how do I get rid of him? And he set about trying to get me to walk away from my existing contract. And it was, and one of the things he did, stunningly, he didn't know what he was doing, but he assigned me to boxing, thinking that I would be a bad fit in boxing. The audience would see me as the successor to Cosell. They would hate me, preppy white kid, et cetera, et cetera. So he assigned me to boxing thinking I knew nothing about it. And of course, he didn't know, and he couldn't have been more wrong. And I had a great expert commentator and network executive named Alex Wallow. They had signed a get acquainted, look-see contract with a 19-year-old heavyweight from New York whose name was Mike Tyson. And suddenly I was on my way to becoming a significant and meaningful boxing commentator. Last thing Swanson would ever have thought could possibly happen. But now that was happening. And at the same time, we were headed toward the 1988 Winter Olympics in Calgary, and my agent came to me and said, Jim, you can't put yourself through this. You have got to walk away from your ABC contract. And I said, why? I've still got the college football studio. I've got these other things, et cetera. And he said, Jim, they're getting ready to do pre-Winter Olympic publicity for the Calgary shows. They're going to be doing news conferences all over the country. You're not going to be on the dais. They're going to have 5 or 6 on-air people up there. The first question at every one of these stops is going to be, where's Jim Lampley and why is he not a part of this, et cetera, et cetera. You can't allow it to happen. You have to walk away from your contract. So it took me a couple of days to swallow that and understand what Art was saying. But at the end of the day, he was correct. I would be cutting my own throat to stay. So with about, I don't know, 7 or 8 months to go before, 8 months to go before the Calgary Olympics, I walked into Dennis Swanson's office at ABC Sports and signed a few papers that relieved them of the contractual responsibility to me and walked out of 1336th Avenue for what I knew was the last time. And that's when I got hired to go to work at CBS in Los Angeles as a local television sports director, and not too long after that got switched to being a daily, nightly news anchor at the same owned and operated station, and wound up with contracts with CBS Sports and CBS News, et cetera. The career kept sort of multiplying like osmosis and spreading out into different areas, regardless of how many people tried to get rid of me. And nobody tried harder than Dennis Swanson. And I spent a whole year in Los Angeles dreaming of beating him to death with a baseball bat, like the scene from Untouchables when the Al Capone character beats a guy to death in a conference room. I imagined the blood on the walls. But at the end of the day, Swanson, in his own odd, perverse way, had done me a favor. And just to show how strange life is, later he became the head of the NBC Sports Cable Olympics operation, and I was the host for the NBC Sports Cable Olympics operation. And I wound up hosting dozens and dozens of hours of Olympics in Athens and Torino with Dennis Swanson sitting in my control room.
Well, there's a lesson right there, right? It is show business in many respects.
100%. The same dudes that you meet on the way up, you're going to see them on the way down too.
All right. So before I want to get into LA in a second, and we'll keep rolling. But I got to ask about WFAN. That was an interesting pit stop. I remember listening to you in that doing Grease Monkey commercials on the air. You and I think Greg Gumbel also had a show too. How did WFAN come about as a quick little excursion there? Talk radio sports, that was a new thing then.
Well, it was 1987. I was in the process of removing myself from ABC Sports. And my agent said, okay, here's something you might want to do while we wait to see what happens next in television. There's a brilliant radio entrepreneur who has created this idea for a 24-hour sports radio station. He has bought WNBC's signal. He's arranged the studio in Astoria. They're getting ready to go on the air with the first 24-hour-a-day sports radio signal, and he wants you to be the primary host. And the money was good, and it was the kind of work that I had not done before. And I knew that it was a brand new medium. So there were no rules. It could be freewheeling. It could be, organic. And I could create and invent whatever I wanted to do. And so, yes, I said yes, and I wound up doing it. And it became a terrific bet. I remember the first day that I was on the air, the very first day of 24-hour sports talk radio. I did this written manifesto about all the things that would happen as the result of this.
And good afternoon again. I'm Jim Lampley, and welcome once again to WFAN 1050 AM radio. The premise of this station is that what the world and the metropolitan area need now is a 24-hour-a-day sports information and sports-related entertainment radio programming format. 1050 on the dial, a place where you can now turn at any time of the day or night and receive within 15 minutes an accurate and complete update from the world of sports. It isn't often in a 75-year-old business that you have an opportunity to say that something is new. But this is new. In addition to the updates, hosts such as myself will fill out each hour with editorial comment, interviews, open phone line conversation, and reflections on important sports topics of the day. Come September, this particular time slot will be occupied by a gentleman named Pete Franklin, who has been a legend as a sports talk show host at radio station 3WE in Cleveland, Ohio. I will be moving as of tomorrow to my regular time slot at 10 a.m. and ending at 1 p.m. Preceding me in the mornings will be Greg Gumbel, who'll be on the air from 6 a.m. to 10 a.m. Radio great Lou Boda will be here every Saturday and Sunday, and we have a variety of other well-founded, deep background sports commentators who'll be filling out each hour on WFAN 24-hour sports radio station.
Vinny from Queens will line up trades for the Rangers, and Sam from Bayonne will reshuffle the Yankees lineup, et cetera, and not necessarily under those identities, but to a certain degree, everything I predicted came true.
Yep.
It was bizarre. I even remember saying at some point there will be 3 stations doing this format in Salt Lake City, all jazz, all the time. It happened. Okay, it really did happen. So that was one of those things where the universe just kept touching me with strange things, etc. 24-hour talk radio, how can that work? Oh, works perfectly. Phenomenal for sports. And Jeff grew his radio empire as the result.
No, it's fantastic. All right. So how do you make a jump to local news? Like, in some respects, okay, and I have a little cul-de-sac of a story here for you in a second, but how does one with such a stellar and amazing career at the network sports level decide on, albeit a flagship, right, local television station in Los Angeles? And how does one even gear shift into news? You're ostensibly hired as sports, right? But you somehow got commingled or crossed swords, if you will, with this news stream thing. And you almost got plucked out of, I don't want to say complacency, but sports to go into news. How does that happen?
Well, first of all, the local sports thing in Los Angeles, once I get shoehorned out of ABC Sports, it's not all that easy to find another niche. There were only 3 networks at the time. So there weren't that many jobs, and there were people with contracts who had them, et cetera. And I had not worked with the executives at NBC or CBS much, if at all. And so, it wasn't that easy to just walk into some other network television sports gig. And my agent, Art Kaminsky, said to me, there's a news director in Los Angeles, news director at KCBS-TV named Eric Sorensen, brilliant young guy. And he's aware of your situation, where you are. And his sports director, Jim Hill, is about to leave his station, go across town to KABC. And Eric is interested in having you replace Jim Hill. And I said, well, that's local television. I'm a network person. Why would I go to local television? And Art said, well, Jim, what you may not realize is that the contract that Jim Hill is walking out of at KCBS-TV is bigger than your contract at ABC Sports. And the one that he's taking to go across town is twice as big. And I said, oh, so that began to change my perspective. And I had at that point lived in New York for 11 years. My marriage in New York was not going all that well. I had spent a great deal of time in Los Angeles, as any person in network sports would have, up to and including the entire month of the Summer Olympics in 1984. I had a lot of friends out there. Um, it felt to me like this was what the universe was telling me to do, and therefore I should do it. And oh, by the way, I'd be filling in a blank that was always there in my career. Everybody else I was working around and with had done local television at some point. I had not. And now I was going to go do it in one of the two biggest local owned and operated stations in the country.
Yeah,
So,
people forget, frankly, it seems recent, but the fact that the local television stations, especially owned and operated ones at that time, were absolute cash generating machines. And in Los Angeles or New York in particular, right, those were some of those local stars literally were making major bank more so than your quote unquote rank and file network type, certainly in news,
a
right?
far more predictable profit margin than, for instance, a network television sports division. Okay. So, yes, I mean, that I can remember Kaminsky smiling at me when he said, "You don't realize that Jim Hill's contract, the one he's walking away from, is bigger than yours." And not even to mention the one that he's headed towards. So, I learned a little bit about the economics of the business at that moment.
And how'd you get into how then did you cross the aisle, shall we say, into to news? That
So
itself is an
I
interesting
was
story
the
too.
local sports director at KCBS-TV beginning in fall of 1987, and because of my experiences with Tyson at ABC, another thing that Dennis Swanson did for me, um, because of what I had demonstrated in a year or so of calling fights at ABC, HBO offloaded the very capable Barry Tompkins and reached out to hire me to do all of their boxing and also come to Wimbledon tennis in the summer to do their weekday coverage at Wimbledon, because Ross Greenberg, the executive producer of their sports division, had seen me do one tennis tournament on the air at ABC, and thought that I could do tennis, which was a little bit of a myth, but we got through it. And
Those are also, people forget too. Those are crown jewels of a then
oh my God,
descendant HBO, right?
I would 100%. I mean, first of all, HBO was, even then, HBO was the most prestigious television network in the world. Not yet in sports, but in entertainment. People knew, people understood, and that was before they had begun the drama thing. So yeah, I just couldn't resist that. The opportunity to work for HBO, the opportunity to do their boxing. It was a package deal, Lampley and Tyson together. And so we went forward with that tremendous opportunity. And then in summer of 1988, I was finishing up the 2 weeks at Wimbledon. I was exhausted, and it was the end of June, early July. And Art Kaminsky, my agent, called me in London and said, "I need you to do one thing on the way back to Los Angeles." I said, "What's that?" He said, "Well, Monday is July 4th, and the news division um, and the head of the network, not Lawrence Tisch, the guy who worked under Tisch. At any rate, they want you to come to New York and fill in for Harry Smith as co-anchor to Kathleen Sullivan on the Monday morning news show, CBS This Morning." And I actually pushed back. I said, "Art, I'm exhausted. I've got to do KCBS-TV Monday afternoon beginning at 5. I don't want to go to New York and do a meaningless morning show on July 4th. It's all going to be barbecues and fireworks, et cetera, et cetera." And Howard Stringer is the name I'm searching for.
Of course.
And Art said, "Jim," I said, "nobody's going to be watching." And he said, "Jim, Howard Stringer and Lawrence Tisch are going to be watching, and they want to see you in that studio." And I said, "Oh, okay." So I decided, all right, I'll do it. Barbecues and fireworks, whatever. I flew to New York. I got off the plane from London to New York. I went to my room at the Regency Hotel. I turned on CNN. An American warship in the Persian Gulf had shot down an Iranian air jetliner. I think it was 290 civilians had died. And suddenly you had a massive diplomatic explosion, an international incident, which was going to dominate the news on Monday morning. And I was doing that show with Kathleen. So my first thought was, okay, well, this is even more ridiculous because now this overwhelming news story dominates the show. I'll do all the barbecues and fireworks, and she's going to be doing all of the serious news stuff. Well, wrong again. Lineup came over a little bit later that night, and I looked at the lineup, and I was doing the defense secretary. I was doing the chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee. I was doing the adjutant general. All of these amazingly salient news interviews under those circumstances, and they were mine in the lineup, not hers. So I was stunned beyond all belief, couldn't understand it, called Kaminsky. He said, I told you to do it. I said, yeah, I guess you were right. So I went in and did that. I did that show, and I got through the show, and I got on a plane. I flew back to Los Angeles. And when I got to the hotel in Los Angeles, there was a note that said, be in Eric Sorensen's office at 7 o'clock tomorrow morning. Eric Sorensen was the news director for KCBS-TV. 7 o'clock in the morning was an outrageously early time for him. I had no idea what that was all about. It was an outrageously early time for me, too. But I got up and went to his office, and he came in a Hawaiian shirt. Eric had a Jack Nicholson grin with eyebrows that danced all the way up to his hairline when he was excited. And his eyebrows were going into the hair that morning. And he said, do you know why I have you in here today? I said, no. He pointed to a stack of 3/4-inch tapes under a window on one side of the room. He said, see those tapes? I said, yeah. He said, you know what they are? I said, no. He said, that's every major local news male anchor in the country. That's every male anchor of any substance or meaning in the country. You know what we're doing with those tapes today? No, Eric, I don't know what you're doing with those tapes. We're putting them in the dumpster out by El Centro in the back of the parking lot. You know why? No, Eric, why? We found our local news anchor. He was on the CBS Morning News yesterday morning, debriefing the cabinet members after a major international incident. I said, so I guess you're telling me I'm about to become a news anchor. He said, I'd love to tell you you have a choice, but I've already spoken to Stringer and Tish, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. This is a done deal, and you have to take it. So that was that. Suddenly I became a news anchor. And of course, it would have been crazy to say no.
And I want to specifically take you to, and this is important for me, the summer and early fall of 1988, because you and I actually met a couple of times. How? And I'm sure you have a laser quick memory of meeting me. You probably didn't. I was an intern in the entertainment unit there through the auspices of the Television Academy. And yeah, I got to roam the halls, and I think this was just after you had that fateful meeting with Eric Sorensen to move over to the news department. And the station was all agog. And but man, what a crazy time that was. And that's why I voraciously went through these pages, because I vividly remember just the craziness of what it was like at Channel 2 News that time.
Well, it was thrilling for me. I was brave enough to think that I could be a very effective television news anchor. I didn't pay as much attention as I needed to and should have to certain cosmetic elements and niceties of the gig. I thought, to myself, I'm a proven television performer. I've been in front of cameras in all sorts of situations. I can do this.
Action News Nightcast is next. Tonight, former hostage Frank Reed, a free man tonight, anxiously awaiting a reunion with his family.
We'll take you on board the A train, make that the LA train, a way to save hours on your commute to work.
2 strikes for John Kennedy Jr., a 3rd strike, and he's out of a job.
We'll show you tonight's base brawl game when Toronto faces Cleveland.
I'm Dorothy Lucy, and if you love Lucy, as in Lucille Ball, we'll have the inside story on the pilot coming up.
Those stories and Steve Rambo's weather action news is next.
I'll never forget the first time a consultant came to town. And, in those days, consultants were enormously powerful within local news. And I remember sitting down with the consultant that they brought in very specifically to talk to me. And he said, why do you wear such colorful and striking ties? And I said, well, because I like them and because I think they're fun to look at. And I like, the idea that I look good on camera with my well-chosen ties. And he said, we want the viewers to look at your face, not at your tie. And that was the first inkling I had that I didn't really understand the details of what local news was all about. Fortunately or unfortunately, however you want to see it, I wound up very, very quickly working with somebody who knew everything about that kind of stuff. Bree Walker was amazingly skilled and had spectacular natural talent for that position. And then, of course, she had this other identity factor with which no one in the country could compete. And she had the greatest focus research of any local news anchor in the country. And I had thought that I was a very big deal. And that, now from what I understood about her, from what I was being told about her, we were going to be two very big deals working together. And this was going to be a spectacular anchor pairing. And within a few weeks, I was walking out on the street outside of the station and running into strangers on the street who would say to me, oh my gosh, isn't it thrilling to work with Bree Walker? Do you feel overwhelmingly excited that you actually get to work with her? And what are you going to do to try to be as good as her, et cetera, et cetera? Oh my. And, and I actually started getting kind of pissed off about it. It was stunning to me because I thought I was the straw who stirred the drink. And eventually I realized that the only way I could control her and I could control her superiority to me within that space was if I got her to fall in love with me. And that was already happening anyway. That was chemical and organic. I mean, from the very first lunch together with station management.
Now, don't go away too much. So we want people to buy this book because there's a. but I look. I do think you're selling your. Well, I think you're underplaying it a little bit. I mean, there's no question that the two of you had the name recognition and the dynamism on camera and in your control of delivery. And to be a big deal.
And electric personal chemistry, for whatever that was worth. I mean, people could see on camera that we liked each other. So that was either good or bad, but, it was there.
I think also, too, people maybe in L.A., if they were around at that time, have to recognize that Channel 2 kind of needed the boost and needed the help. CBS, the network was... The CBS Evening News was in decline. Having interned myself at CBS News in Washington a year before in college and stuff, and seeing that sort of firsthand and stuff. And no stops seemed to be pulled, if you will, for to make this kind of stuff happen. Obviously, I guess because you moved over into the news side of things, that's what opened the door for Keith Olbermann to come into sports. Is that do I have that correct?
Well, Olbermann was killing it, and building audience at the independent station.
It was Channel 5, right?
Yeah, Channel 5, and he had a distinctive style and a very personal way of doing things. And as soon as I was made the news anchor, which I agreed to in a heartbeat, and because my agent told me you have to agree to this, they're going to throw tons of money at you. So I did that. And then the news director who had, spearheaded the process of making me an anchor, Eric Sorensen, said, okay, I want you to go to lunch with Keith Olbermann. Have you met him? I said, I haven't met him. He doesn't leave his studio. He doesn't come to Lakers games. He doesn't come to Dodgers games. He sits in his studio and writes, as far as I can tell. And he said, yes, you're right. He does not behave the way other people in his position do. So you got to go get him. You've got to reach out. You got to meet him. You got to make a phone call, and you've got to take him to lunch, and you've got to recruit him to come and take your position at Channel 2. And I did that. It took me 2 or 3 lunches and some time on the phone with his agent, Jean, forget her name. But at any rate, I wound up, putting a sort of fraternity rush on Keith Olbermann and getting him to come and be a part of the newscast. And then they put Steve Rambo as the weather forecaster. And we had a whole new dynamic group for Channel 2 News. And on that basis, a chance to compete against Channel 7 and Channel 4 and try to improve the ratings.
Probably more competitive even than the New York market is in terms of just a quality, at least at the time, certainly, quality newscasts and star wattage.
And over a period of time, the ratings didn't rise. I mean, they rose at first, but then they plateaued, and they did not keep going up. And eventually, through their research and their considerations, et cetera, the station came to the conclusion that I was the weak link. And they thought they had the right to force me to go back to being the sports director. And a careful reading of the contract demonstrated that they did not have the right to force me to go back to being the sports director. And eventually I was out on the street, and they had to pay me, I think, 2.5 years that remained on the contract. So it was a tremendous financial windfall for me. The only way they wouldn't have had to pay me that money was if I had gone to work as a news anchor elsewhere in the market. But I was now focused back on network television sports, and Dick Ebersol wanted me to do a lot of different things for NBC Sports. So that's where I went. And I already had HBO to fall back on anyway, because, Channel 2 had allowed me to sign the HBO contract while I was still their sports director. So my contractual situation protected me very handsomely at the moment when I was removed from the evening news with Bree Walker.
All right, I want to get to the HBO thing in 1 second, but I do have to say, and I'm sure other people have opinions about this too, for those who remember from 40 years ago, and your memory of this is amazing. So kudos. I'm not sure, and I'm sure you've already probably figured this out. I don't think it was your fault, right? I think that station and the network and the owned and operated stations and the Larry Tisch years and the craziness of the corporate. There were a lot of things going on way before you showed up in chair there, frankly. And I'm sure you've probably have come to some of those kinds of conclusions. I mean, look, I remember vividly I was in the newsroom one night in early September, and poor John Schubeck, right, a guy who was legendarily known in the LA area as a news anchor and stuff. I saw him, and it was sad. It was comical and weird, but it was also sad at the time. He was literally trying to do a news break right in between shows, and he was drunk, he's drunk off his ass, and he couldn't get through it. And it was just
that's why I replaced him.
Okay, I didn't know that. I didn't know that part of it.
That was exactly why I replaced him.
Okay,
it was a Ted Knight scenario. Yes.
Yeah, and to me, it was just like, young, 21-year-old recent grad, right? Like how does this go on, right? And you learn like the craziness of this industry, and frankly, the minute you're up, the minute you're down. I mean, it's we said it before in our earlier part of the conversation. Show business, right? This is a branch of show business, and some of these decisions, frankly, a lot of these decisions aren't necessarily made on rational thinking and or understanding human beings, so to speak.
Well, go back to my first meeting with the consultant. I mean, I was very excited and feeling self-important because I had been chosen to be the primary news anchor at a major owned and operated station in the nation's second largest market, or largest market, whichever it was. And I thought of that as being a kind of majesty job. And the consultant comes in and says, "Why do you wear colorful ties?" And you know, that was my first realization that, this is not about how substantially and seriously and convincingly do I read the stories. This is about whether I'm looking into the lens at exactly the right angle and what ties do I wear. Because, while I was talking to the consultant about my colorful ties, I was talking to Bree at night about how to hold my head still between the part of the frame that was the camera shot and the part where the video effect had to be. That was another one of Bree's tremendous qualities, was that she could hold her head so still that she never dipped into shadowing or obscuring the effect. And that was, a critical part of being an anchor. And I was accustomed to being a lot more free form from doing television sports on cameras. It wasn't really the same kind of thing. So, all the time that I was learning about the strict and detailed mechanics of this, and Bree was trying to help me adopt and accommodate, or adapt, I should say, and accommodate to that, I was also feeling disgruntled and disappointed that the job was so much less substantial and meaningful than I had led myself to believe it was. I mean, there was no question in my mind, okay, because of my sports experience, there was no question in my mind that once an earthquake hit, or there was some other riot, some story that required, live ad hoc anchoring, developing material, gathering stories, asking the right questions on camera, there was no question in my mind I was the best anchor in the market at that. Better than Bree, better than the people at the other stations, et cetera, et cetera. Because that all came out of my live sports experience, going to Olympics and Super Bowls and things like that. And that was different than sitting still, holding my head perfectly fixed in the frame between the box and the effect, and properly reading the script as a local anchor. The heart of the job was not what I thought it was. I thought the heart of the job was mastering the content and communicating with the audience. The heart of the job was filling the picture the right way, and being an integral part who worked perfectly with the weather person and the sports director, and most importantly, the queen of the show, who was Bree.
All right, how does this HBO thing come about in that process? Does that happen before or during the KCBS?
I'm at KCBS-TV. I had gotten there partially because the president of sports at ABC Sports, who wanted to get rid of me, had assigned me to boxing thinking that it would make me look bad, that it was not a sport that I would fit in, that I wouldn't cover it well, et cetera, et cetera. He miscalculated. I told you about having had the background, and he also miscalculated what the public response to Tyson was going to be. And HBO was in the process of trying to build bigger identity for their sports department, which was fundamentally based in boxing. All HBO Sports had was boxing and Wimbledon. They didn't have a magazine show at that time. Real Sports wasn't up and running, et cetera, et cetera. So they wanted a play-by-play person with a bigger, more striking national identity than Barry Tompkins. They liked Barry Tompkins. Barry Tompkins was a very good blow-by-blow announcer on the boxing telecast. But Barry Tompkins wasn't a guy who had worked at ABC Sports, who had been picked out by Roone Arledge, who had gone to several Olympics. That wasn't his dossier. And so when I proved on ABC, disproving Dennis Swanson's predilection and proving that I could not only do boxing, but that I could do it well, then the discussion at HBO became, well, why don't we get him? And Michael Fuchs and Seth Abraham came to Los Angeles sometime in late 1988, and I had a meeting with them. And my agent called me afterward and said, they love you. They want to sign you. They want you to do all the boxing and also go to Wimbledon every summer. And I said, is this going to be okay with CBS? And he said, yes. CBS has already agreed to give you the window, to give you the freedom to do this because they think it enhances them too. So that's why I wound up doing HBO.
How do you balance the scheduling of that, the day-to-day of KCBS and the demands of the intensity of irregularly scheduled, aside from Wimbledon events, and frankly, the frame of mind, right? Because you're going from local news to event-like or event-driven or event aura sports, kind of a mindset shift too, or does that dissipate when the plane takes off and you leave that behind, so to speak?
I think you just stated it very well. And once the plane took off, then I was another person into another role. The supposed conflict or dissonance between these roles never bothered me. It was all just doing television, being on television, saying the things I said on television. My style as the anchor of a 5-hour telecast from Wimbledon was essentially the same as my style as the anchor of election night from Channel 2. My style as the 5 o'clock and 6 o'clock and 11 o'clock news anchor at Channel 2, that was different because it was so structured. You know, it's all scripted, it's all timed. And by the way, the more they do focus research and the more I learn about the focus research, the more I have to deal with the fact that Bree's the star. And that was deflating to my ego. So, you know, I was handling a lot of different things at that time, the hardest of which was getting accustomed to the fact that I wasn't the star of the 6 o'clock and 11 o'clock news. Bree was.
I will say, though, that so it's interesting, the fact that you had the HBO thing to effectively fall back on. But I looking at some of those early years of that coverage that you did, I'm going to project here. You tell me if I'm right or wrong. Either you did a tremendous job in selling it, or it looked like you were actually enjoying this kind of thing. You enjoyed the boxing thing, perhaps more so than some of the other things that you had done in your career.
Well, it's live and unscripted.
There you go. 4-punch, 5-punch, 6-punch combination, body shot, bang, 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 bang. Try and stop it. Bang, bang. Here I come. Bang. Do you want to throw sometime? Bang. This is the Manny Pacquiao who has dominated boxing for the past 3 years. Bang. Bang, 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 bang.
And when Pacquiao...
You want to throw back? Bang. Keep coming.
When Pacquiao starts doing this, now I tend to agree, Crotty has to do something to keep him off.
No, he isn't.
The only thing that was ever scripted on the boxing show was that I knew what I was going to say in the opening on camera, and I knew what I was going to ask Larry and the expert commentator, whoever was the expert commentator at the time. Pretty shortly it was George. And those personality interactions were really good for me. I knew that because even if I had difficulty finding my footing working directly with Bree, while by the way, falling in love with her and marrying her, I found it easy to work with merchants and easy to work with the boxing experts because they relied on me to run the telecasts. They knew that I understood the mechanics of what we were doing and the protocol of what we were doing better than they did. And they followed my lead in every way, shape, or form. So HBO was a tremendous opportunity for me to do what I could do best. All live, all unscripted. The tennis telecasts were 5.5 hours long. The boxing telecasts were sometimes 3 fights. It was a lot of talking and a lot of content, and I was good at that. So,
and I think
that
also
part worked out well.
I also think too the Olympics experiences that you had previously too didn't hurt, right? Because that's an event driven kind of dynamic with live and setup, but also in importance and gravitas and things that and large audiences, right? So the spectacle part of that certainly. That experience didn't hurt you at all in these kinds of environments, which are spectacles in and of themselves. Some boxing might go a little overboard.
It was my Olympics exposure, both at ABC and then briefly at CBS and then at NBC. I think it was all that Olympics exposure that helped HBO to come to the conclusion he's the one for us because he's global. He's big. He's doing the most majestic events. He's at the level of aura that we want him to be at to work at HBO.
All right. So tell me now how NBC then creeps back into the picture. I think you kind of hinted at it before, but it's clear that they have some needs. And the Olympics thing, again, here it comes again, right? The fact that they this at the time brash approach to buy, if you will, rights for multiple Olympics. I mean, it was a big thing at the time, and NBC needed the help to tell us how that happens as you're now basically just working for HBO at this point.
Well, of course, you'll remember that going back to the beginning of my television genesis, when I went to the college age reporter talent hunt in Birmingham, Alabama, to be screened for that opportunity, the person who was running the talent hunt doing the screening was Arledge's assistant, Dick Ebersol. And during the first year or two that I worked at ABC Sports, Ebersol was recruited away from ABC by NBC to run a new late night division where he bonded with a guy named Lorne Michaels to create a program named Saturday Night Live. I used to go sit in the green room as a guest at Saturday Night Live because, Dick was keeping track of me and following me. He had been a part of the process that brought me to ABC. And so once Dick was at NBC for late night programming, then eventually they turned to him to help run the sports division. And most specifically, since his experience with Arledge had given him a lot of chops in this area, how to get in on the Olympic rights situation. So they wound up, in the market for future Olympic rights. Now, in 1992, when KCBS-TV and the CBS owned and operated stations division decided, you know what, Lampley and Bree isn't working. She intimidates him. We're going to have to back off and change this. And they wanted to use the Albertville Olympics as cover, sort of, for the change. So they were going to send me to the Albertville Olympics to report for all of the owned and operated stations. And, I think there were 7 of them. So I was sent to Albertville to report for all of the O&O stations. And Albertville belongs to CBS. And I'm there for the CBS-owned stations. And on the second or third day that I was in the broadcast center there, I bumped into Dick Ebersol in the hallway. And Ebersol was visiting and had been invited by the CBS execs to come in and visit and see what they were doing, because he was preparing to put NBC into the mix for future Olympic rights, and they didn't get Lillehammer 1994, but eventually they did get into the rights situation, and Ebersol became the overall coordinating producer for the Olympics. But before they did anything, they had gotten Barcelona 92. So we're in Albertville, winter of 92. I've been fired. Nobody knows I've been fired. All right. It was a total secret at that moment. He's gone to the Olympics. He's feeding all of the O&Os. We're not saying anything about it beyond that. So nobody knew that when I came back, I wasn't going to be anchoring the news anymore. But I knew. And I was in the hallway at the broadcast center in Albertville, and I bumped into Ebersol. And very quickly he said, "Oh my God, I'm. It's so interesting that I'm seeing you here because I've been thinking about you. I wish that you weren't doing so well in LA. I wish you weren't killing it as a news anchor, because I need a late night host for Barcelona, and you, of course, are the best person for the job." And I said, "Dick, I've been fired." And almost instantly made a deal that made me the late night host for Barcelona and gave me a catalog of other things to do at NBC Sports, including golf host, NFL live host, et cetera, et cetera. All of that came from an accidental bump in with Ebersol in the hallway of the broadcast center in Albertville.
Oh, and by the way, an Olympics gig for another, decade and a half through 2008, right?
Well, 1994. Yeah. Okay. So it was Albertville. It was, what did I do? And it was Barcelona 92.
Well, all the NBC ones, at least, right? Which was largely most of them, right? I mean, TNT had some of the Winter
it was
Olympics.
Barcelona 92, and then it was onward from there. I did, 96, 98, all of those were NBC Olympics, all the way through Sydney 2002, Athens 2004, Torino 2006. A lot of my 14 Olympics are NBC, and all because of Ebersol.
Just amazing. Just absolutely amazing. And probably, I think unmatched, right? Even more so than Jim McKay back in the day.
I have the most Olympics assignments of any American sports broadcaster, more than McKay, more than anybody else.
It's an absolute amazing feat. But a testament, right? So, all right. So I want to get to a cul-de-sac here because you've been more than generous with your time. Tell me then, though, and I know you go into specific detail in the book, and again, not too much because we want people to buy the book. What of this dual nature now of HBO and NBC? Now, you're doing sports in both, but I got to think, and you do make a couple of references in the book, that the timing doesn't always work out per se. Boxing matches don't necessarily respect, let's say, the NFL schedule the next morning. How are you handling all of that? It seems like with relative ease in the beginning, but maybe as time wore on, it got a little harder to do. I don't know.
Not with ease. And the NBC NFL assignments began to suffer. They assigned me to work with expert commentators in whom I knew they weren't interested. So that was my first indication that I was sliding downward in the NFL play-by-play hierarchy. And obviously, it was damaging that I had all of these schedule conflicts. For instance, the very first weekend that I was supposed to host a golf tournament was the Bob Hope tournament out in the desert. I had an NFL football game, and I had an HBO boxing match. HBO took precedence. So I had a fight in Las Vegas, and I missed my first golf date for NBC after having been, somewhat trumpeted as the new golf host. And there were 5 different times in one of those falls, either 94 or 95, I forget which, or no, 92 or 93, I forget which, but there were 5 different times in one of those autumns when I had a boxing match on Saturday night and an NFL football game on Sunday. And I would have to make a flight either late night or in the morning, scramble to the stadium, sit down with the expert commentator for 15 minutes, go over what we were going to do, look at a spotting chart that somebody else had prepared, and then call the game. That was absolutely not ideal circumstances for doing NFL play-by-play. So my NFL play-by-play was suffering. The only thing that stayed intact was boxing, because HBO had scheduling precedence, and therefore that was my primary responsibility. Eventually, it only made sense that NBC was going to get tired of, being in the wind behind HBO, and they were.
But 30 years of calling boxing, I mean, until literally the end of HBO's involvement with the sport, it's pretty clear that they not only enjoyed having you, but benefited supremely by your presence. And I think, I mean, again, looking at the longevity of that career and the quality of the product over those years, I'm not a huge boxing fan, but I've certainly tuned in for many of those events that you covered over the years. It's sure hard to say that you weren't enjoying yourself in that process.
I loved it. It was the most literary sport. It was the most human sport. It was the first sport my mother had ever sat me down to watch on television when I was a kid. And so I loved all of those parts of it. And oh, by the way, it was the most prestigious television network artistically in the business. And there were no commercials. As my very dear friend Jack Nicholson said to me more than once, Lamp, you're not selling soap. And, that was a way of saying you're at a higher level here. And what you're doing is special. And oh, by the way, you've already heard about my friendships with lots of television executives. I mean, I was friendly with Eric Sorensen. I was friendly with the O&O chairman at CBS, Eric Ober. I was friendly with Ebersol, which, made a big difference in my career. I had been friendly with other people at ABC. Ultimately, Richard Plepler was the dearest friend I ever had among television executives. Ultimately, Richard Plepler and I became dining partners and saw eye to eye on almost everything. And so there was a harmony and a status level at HBO that was irresistible to me, enormously stimulating, and I liked all the people.
Yeah, I think a lot of people say that about Plepler. And when he was there, I think he's kind of a one of a kind, and I think that, frankly, a hallmark of what HBO used to be, if you will.
Richard Plepler was HBO, and there's a moment in the book, you'll see it, when we're at the Emmys or the Golden Globes in Hollywood, and I'm seated at his table, which was a privilege that I had for years, and I had to pinch myself. I'm Tom Hanks, Nicole Kidman. These are my seatmates. I'm sitting at Richard's table for that kind of thing, and it was 1998, and he said, "You see that guy over there in the striking gray suit?" I said, "Yeah, who's that?" He said, "His name is John Stanky, and I think you ought to go meet him. He is your new boss." And so I met that night, the head of AT&T, functional chief executive at AT&T, and I sat and talked with him at his table for about 20 minutes. And I went back to Richard's table, and he said, "So how did that go?" I said, "I think the boxing telecast is over with." He said, "That's my impression too. I just wanted to be sure that we were on the same page."
Yeah, and AT&T has just made a complete mess out of it. And you're right. And of course, they
have destroyed the greatest television network in the world.
Yeah, that's it. That is absolutely an unquestioned,
indisputable.
Yep, indisputable. It happened. All right, so let me segue then into a final sort of question for you. Then and maybe we can use boxing as the entree into it, right? Because clearly the sport has seen better days in terms of popular appeal. You've got the UFC now and all these other sort of diversions that, sort of maybe taken some of that audience or what used to have been that audience. But I want to frame it as this. Give me a sense of obviously you're still a sports fan, which is great to hear, given your UNC following for basketball as we record this.
Go to our heels.
There you go. But the sport of boxing and then generally sports, it's the sports overall. What are your current thoughts? I mean, you're kind of, you're kind of out of the sort of the day to day and all that sort of titular sports coverage and stuff, but you may have a more discerning eye about the state of things. Where do you think boxing is today, and where do you see pro sports right now? Because Lord knows there's so much money in there. I don't know. I don't know where it's all going to wind up at some point, because I think I don't know. I defer to you and your logic, because I'm sure you've got some opinions.
Well, okay. First of all, my favorite line about boxing has always been something that I heard Larry Merchant say one time on a telecast, and it became a logical mantra. Boxing can't fix it, can't kill it. And I think that is absolutely true. You can't fix it because it's an utterly entrepreneurial sport, which has various elements that are guaranteed to bring out the worst in everybody, and the worst in the promoters, the worst in the trainers and managers, the worst in the television executives, et cetera, et cetera. And, somehow or another, at the end of the day, the fighters have to redeem it over and over again through the vehicle of their own courage and heroism and compelling personalities. And so, boxing isn't popular. Nobody cares. Nobody wants to know about boxing until Tyson comes along, or Pacquiao comes along, or, somebody else. Right now, there's a guy named David Benavidez who could become a giant global star. These things ultimately come along to counterintuitively lift back up the sick man of the sports world, which is boxing. And that was part of the charm for me, was to continue to be a part of this confounding thing that can't fix it, can't kill it. It's dead. It's been dead for 100 years, and it won't go away. And it's still going to spit out every 2 or 3 years. It's going to spit out the biggest event in the culture, because nothing else can match the drama of two guys going into the ring half naked, facing each other face to face, their heads uncovered, their bodies vulnerable, and trying to beat each other up with their fist. Nothing can match it. I'm sorry. And, I love basketball, I love football, but there's no drama like Jack Dempsey versus Jess Willard, or Muhammad Ali versus George Foreman, or Manny Pacquiao versus Floyd Mayweather, until that drama takes place and punctures its own balloon, like Pacquiao Mayweather did. But the bottom line is, it's still the simplest, the most elemental, the least highly technical of sports for the viewer or the fan to understand, and you can bet on it. And there are all sorts of reasons why. I don't care how many times you declare it dead, it's not going to go away. And now we have all of these delivery systems, the pay-per-view type delivery systems that maximize the financial return from even a small audience, and give a new lifeline to a sport like boxing, which features events that have very specific appeal. They don't always appeal to the entire broad audience, but they appeal to people who are willing to pay 20, 30, 40, 50 bucks to see it. And that's a different kind of economic base that is going to prevent the death of boxing.
How about sports generally? Are you cynical like I am in terms of how much money and how much expansion and
You mean,
private equity money
going
and
to
all
see
that
a
stuff?
pay-per-view NCAA tournament? Yes, we are. Are we going to see a pay-per-view Super Bowl? I don't have any doubt about it. Yeah, I don't know how long it takes, but that's ultimately where everybody's going. Oh, by the way, there's a certain charm in it. As Nicholson said, you're not selling soap. Imagine a Super Bowl with no commercials. How much fun will that be? Imagine a Super Bowl with no commercials that, oh, by the way, only takes 2 hours and 35 or 40 minutes to complete. That's part of the advantage of pay-per-view type viewing of sports that people don't think about or acknowledge when they're looking at it.
Yeah, I guess the communal part of it though is the thing you lose, and clearly I think fandom changes too. It's very hard to be, I think, a fan generally of sports teams these days when, I don't know, it costs $200 and $300 just to get in the door. Before drinks and parking and all that kind of stuff. It just seems that money has capitalized itself, if you will. In the primary order.
People still want to see something that's live and real, and they will always make a space in their budgets and in their hearts to find a way to see that thing that is live and real and appeals to them, whether it's a high school football game or the Super Bowl or Dempsey versus Tunney or Ali versus Frazier, whatever it is. People want to see live, real. It only happens once. Boxing personifies that.
Okay, last question, and then I'm gonna let you promote, and finally let you go. And I thank you again. In your career, was there any sport or event that you regretted not having a chance to do, either because you wanted to or just never had the opportunity to?
Well, let me think. Is there something I didn't cover? I covered Super Bowls. I was the host. Wasn't the play-by-play, but I was the host. It was fun. Covered World Series. I was a reporter. I wasn't the play-by-play. Baseball play-by-play. Yeah, I have never had any meaningful role in the NCAA basketball tournament. I went to undergraduate school and graduate school at the University of North Carolina. I did the Dean Smith show as a graduate student. I was at Carolina for Dean Smith's first 3 Final Fours in 66, 67, and 68. Those are my freshman, sophomore, and junior years at UNC. So I'm nurtured on college basketball in a large way. And eventually I was given the chance to call one college game at CBS and one NBA game on NBC. And I must not have been any good. Ebersol never assigned me to another NBA game after one game on NBC. And I never called another college game on CBS after the one that I did. So I have to assume that the thing that I couldn't do in a career in which I think I proved that I could do about 25 or 30 different things, the thing that I couldn't do apparently was basketball play-by-play. And that is so counterintuitive to me, it blows my mind. But I can't draw any other logical conclusion because I was given the chance and I was never sent back. So I must not have been very good.
Do you miss it? Do you miss being in the day-to-day and these big events, or have you?
No, I don't miss anything now. I am after 6 years of boxing purgatory, during which, in order to get back to ringside, I had to participate in a newly conceived medium, live chat, and to type text commentary into a chat chain along with 3 other people at ringside. I had to do that to get back into the media room, get my face back being seen at prize fights. And now, this Arab sheikh who is buying boxing is pretty obsessive about putting me back at ringside doing blow by blow. So I'm headed back toward what was my most accepted and celebrated role outside of Olympic coach, which was boxing blow by blow. So here I go again to go back and do boxing blow by blow. And if I were to say to you, I think I got shortchanged because I didn't get to do this or didn't get to do that, or somebody thought I wasn't a good basketball announcer, etc., that's crazy. I've had arguably the most privileged career of anybody ever in my line of work. Costas never had any of the rough spots or ups and downs that I had, but I got, if anything, even more opportunities than Bob. I'm never going to put up a comparison and say, oh, I was just as good as him. At the end of the day, he's my model. I think he was great, is great, et cetera, and I wouldn't compare, but I think we're a lot alike. And I think we both understood what we did best. And I think in both instances, what we did best was hosting at the Olympics. And then he had baseball play-by-play, which he was born to do. And I had boxing. And so we were alike, but we differed. And we were both talented. And I think we got a chance to prove it. He stayed at one network almost all of his career. That operated enormously to his advantage. I had a much more fractious personal life. I made far more mistakes outside of the work chair than Bob did. We knew it. We talked about it. And we're still good friends to this day. If there's anybody in the world that, if you said, okay, who else would you rather be? I would lie if I didn't say, I wish I had behaved as well as Bob Costas did. I wish I had behaved as well as Jim Nantz did, but I didn't. And I was still able to survive and still able to do a lot of meaningful and fun things just as they did.
Man, I enjoyed that. I hope you did too. I just know that Jim's got another book or two in him, but get the first one. It's out now, depending on when you're listening to this. Of course, it's called It Happened, A Uniquely Lucky Life in Sports Television. And that was just a mere sampling of what's available for you in this book. And of course, you can get it as quickly as humanly possible by going to our website at goodseatsstillavailable.com. Just search up this episode number 390 with me and Jim Lampley, and you will find convenient links to our pals at Amazon to the hardcover, the Kindle, or even the audiobook versions of this book. And we'll get a couple of shekels of referral love. We appreciate that. It is co-authored with Art Chansky. There's a foreword in there by Taylor Sheridan. And you will just find it to be a delightful read, and you will not be able to put it down. It is published by our friends at Matt Holt Books. And more of Jim can be found online. You follow him on Instagram. He's at The Real Jim Lampley. And you can also check out his website at Jim Lampley, Lampley, JimLampley.com. While you're online, make sure you bookmark and regularly visit our website. Again, goodseatsstillavailable.com. It's where we post all of our episodes if you're, for whatever reasons, not getting it in your podcast feeds. And shame on you if you're not. By all means, please follow and download and subscribe to what we've got for you each and every week. You don't want to miss a thing around here. Some 5-star reviews on the Apple Podcasts or the Spotify feeds, wherever you can rate and review. We appreciate that. And let's see, if you're following us on the socials, we're most active on the Blue Sky. You'll find us at goodseatsstillavailable.com there. You will find us pretty active on the X Twitter thing. There we are found at Good Seats Still. Just about everywhere else, including YouTube, where we also post the shows, you'll find us at Good Seats Still Available. If you'd like to send us some email, please by all means do so. We're at hello@goodseatsstillavailable.com. Don't forget, while you're on the website, check out our merch section. Lots of great stuff from great sponsors. Great discounts for you, too, if you're looking for throwback merchandise and shirts and all that kind of stuff. A lot of great stuff there for you to peruse and hopefully Again, give us some shekels of referral love when you find something you like. We appreciate that too. Our thanks to the great Jerry Payne, of course, for his continued audio excellence, and to you for listening this far. We appreciate it. More fun and frivolity awaits you next week. Stay tuned to your feeds. Until then, stay safe and sane. We love you for listening. Thank you. Bye.